Part of the beauty of being an artist is understanding that you can adjust the complexity of your ideas by simplifying shapes. If you have captured a memory that you'd like to paint small, I'll show you how you can minimize the detail and make the composition graphic and interesting. And if you struggle and worry about getting just the right colors, try this exercise. To begin, I'm only drawing the most essential lines. First, with pencil, I'm capturing a simple gesture drawing that I'm going to be reinforcing with pen. The focus is on my son and husband walking down a busy working boat harbor. In the reference photo, there is an overwhelming amount of detail of overlapping lines, boxes, and shapes, so I'm going to be simplifying the detail by 2/3. Ideally, I'd like to complete this small watercolor sketch in 1 hour. You can incorporate this practice to help you improve your watercolor paintings in both the studio and on location with your art. Painting small first will help you to determine if a composition is strong enough to go larger. This practice will also help you play with the shapes and colors so you can adjust them if you do decide to spend time doing a larger version of the scene. So for blocking in the color, I'm blocking in shades of blue first. Lighter shades of the blue will become the white of the boat to the right. In the harbor, light bounces around off the water and creates reflections and colors on the boats, and that's what's going to happen here. Color has always inspired my work. Often I'll choose an important color or an accent color as the first splash of color pigment on my watercolor paper. And blue is also an important symbolic color in this painting. My son's favorite color just happens to be blue, and it's also the color of the boats and the buildings. For my husband's cargo pants, I'm pulling burnt umber, cobalt blue, and Windsor violet from my palette to vary the hues. Allow yourself freedom of pulling different colors into the line work. Set your mind free of worry of the colors being accurate to the reference material. Focus more on value. Value is the light to dark range of color. To simplify, choose from blue hues that you already have. So when I go to paint the jackets, I'm choosing the blue, as my husband's jacket is really more of a gray blue. This small painting allows me to try out a color to see if I like it in the results. I'll make my son's jacket a slightly darker, different shade of blue. And this will help keep the painting interesting. And to be honest, I've never really worried much about color mixing. It's always come naturally to me, and it's never been anything that's ever stood in my way of making paintings. But when I started watching other artists teach on YouTube, I realized that people in general, even those who are professional artists, really stress on color mixing. And that sent me on a journey to try to understand why color mixing comes innately to some but not to others. And I admit, color swatching can be a very helpful tool, and this will help you to understand the flexibility and attributes of the colors that you buy. However, by keeping your paint color selection small, you can focus on perhaps something more important, which is the value of the color, and that is what's going to make the painting interesting. This scene is a challenge because it has a lot of architectural elements, and the only organic elements are really my son and husband and a little splash of water. I give my son and husband the most details as they are going to be the focus in the sketch. You'll notice that I'm putting a lot of saturated paint down in the shadow areas, and I'm letting it sometimes sit for a few seconds. This helps the paint absorb into the paper a bit. I can then feather out the color to lighter values with clean water. I can also drop more saturated paint into already wet areas to darken up the value, and you probably want to let the paint dry just a little bit to be able to control that. The same gesture drawing that I did with the pencil, I'm now doing with brushwork. That's the squiggly lines that are creating the shadows and the folds of my son's jacket. And the paper is Arch's 140-pound cold press that was torn from sections of a full-size 22 by 30-inch sheet. As you paint, use the water to stretch that blue hue into lighter values. Tone it down on your palette with other colors. I'm not trying to match the colors perfectly from my reference photo. I'm allowing myself to just pull color from my palette without worry. This allows me to focus more on values. My son's boots will be darker, almost black, and I'm relying on the gesture drawing with the pen work. I need to leave some highlights on the right side of the boot, and this is the same with my husband's shoes, so the brushwork here is very minimal. If you find value in my painting videos, please like and subscribe. Tell me what subjects you struggle with in the comments below. Those are great ways to support my channel. At some point, I need to begin the background, and I want to make the pier posts have a texture of weathered paint and rust. I'm using a dry brush technique for this. The posts will be layered a couple times. This entire section is highly simplified to fit the scale of the watercolor sketch. Let's back up a bit and talk about shapes. I didn't draw every detail, line, or box from my reference photo. I began with the figures, and I literally drew lines around the figures until the scene looked busy enough and balanced from the point of the drawing. I could have eliminated half of the detail beyond my son and husband and just brought in washes of color with some splatter. That would have worked really well if I was trying to do a painting like this on location. And the buoy will be a bright orange and be a much needed pop of color. You can see how I modeled the object to create the roundness. And both my husband and son are wearing scarves. I'm making those red. Just choose a bright red or an earthy red from your palette. You could also choose an orange if you wanted to. I really like the way Winslow Homer used red accents in some of his watercolors. That has always stuck with me, and I want to mimic that with the scarves and the buoy. And I also added just a lighter value of orange to the top of the boat on the right. The pier needed a range of colors to create texture over. And basically this is the part where I'm going to start creating the background as I see it, and I'm going to try and simplify it. The buildings in the background are made from very simple shapes, and they are in the colors that are on my palette. Once the pier is nearly dry, I can begin adding more detail, and I'll do this in a couple of layers. The lines I'm drawing create perspective. The pier needs to move backwards, and the distance between the lines is going to narrow. And now is the time that I can also start adding the boxy openings for the posts. Each layer of detail has darker, more saturated colors. When layering paint, the pigment of the additional layers begins to sit on top of the paper, and this helps with keeping colors saturated. And again, I'm using texture of the cold pressed watercolor paper to pick up on my dry brush technique by lightly bouncing my brush along the paper to create the details of the weathered pier. You need to have enough color on your brush that isn't super runny or super light in value to do this, and to also get a range of color in detail. Dip your brush around your paints to see what works. Don't be afraid to try again if you need a second pass. The color left behind that's in the first layer is from that multicolored wash. That's why it was important to incorporate different hues in that first part of the painting. And the orange of the buoy needs to lightly reflect back onto the boats. This is very wet and loose, and I didn't want to do it too soon. I wanted to do it once I had some more value with the other background elements. The left side of my source material photo also had a very interesting story, and it incorporated a weathered blue boat. So I really had to choose one side or the other when telling this story because I wanted to do a smaller painting. Remember, each layer beyond the first allows pigment to sit more on top of the paper versus absorb in and dull out. And this is where you're going to start getting more saturated color and more contrast. At some point, as the painting is winding down, each mark is more intentional and smaller. I don't want to lose the contrast by overworking this small watercolor sketch. A subject like this could be very daunting, but I think watching this, hopefully you can see how you can simplify this and still capture a beautiful memory in a small or even a large painting in a very short amount of time. And I realized that after taking off the tape that there were just a few more little details that I could add, and I did this in seconds, and that really made a difference. So here's the finished painting. What do you think?